Hi, and welcome to session 2. I'm Dr. Jenny French. In our first session, we laid the groundwork of what the science of reading is and some different ways that we can assess students if we have concerns or suspicions about their reading abilities. In this session, session 2, we're going to look more specifically at the students that are struggling with decoding and spelling. Let's take a look at the objectives for this session. In this session, session 2, we're going to dive into what it means to decode and encode, and also all of those strands of the word recognition piece, and really focus on students who are non-readers or non-decoders and what it will look like to support them within your content area. We're going to look at decoding multisyllabic words using morphological analysis and supporting their word recognition through spelling. We're also going to look at how to design vocabulary lessons so that students have a deeper understanding of their meaning and the retention lasts longer. And then we're going to end the session looking at engagement strategies for adolescent learners, especially when it comes to reading. So just as a reminder, let's take another look at our 3 types of non-readers. We have our non-decoders, our disfluent students, and our non-comprehenders. In this session, we're really focusing on that left column, the non-decoders. These are students that are struggling at the word level. So we are going to take the 3 different types of non-readers and compare it side by side with Scarborough's reading rule. So we're going to start with the word recognition skills. These are the skills that the non-decoders need. So let's make those connections. It is important to understand that even though your students might be in high school or middle school, if they are lacking these skills, we can't circumvent them and just focus on writing instruction. I work with schools all over the country, and sometimes high school teachers are the toughest sell because their standards are focused on writing achievement. So that's where they want to focus their instruction, which that makes sense. But we can't circumvent these foundational skills if students do not have them. Our research shows that there has to be direct teaching of phonological skills until they become proficient readers and writers. We are not going to get students who can write great argumentative essays if they are struggling at the word level. Phonemic awareness instruction, when linked to systematic decoding and spelling instruction, is a key to preventing reading failure in children who come to school without these prerequisite skills. The good news is that these skills can be taught and remediated in a short period of time if they get the right instruction on a consistent basis. The research actually shows if they do 5 minutes a day of targeted instruction on phonological awareness and phonemic awareness skills, that within 12 weeks, they can close that gap. Not that that will catapult them to reading on level, but it will close that gap of sound symbol correspondence, which is the premise and the basis for learning to read. And we know that the most effective reading instruction for any age includes daily practice of reading fluency, short practice drills of skills, repeated readings of texts, alternate partner reading, simultaneous oral reading of easy material, and lastly, independent reading. And these are all things that we're going to look at strategies together so that you're comfortable with those protocols. In our first session, we discussed that feelings with adolescents really matter. If they are in their feelings, they are going to have a difficult time learning. They're not going to have the mental bandwidth to be able to learn, to problem solve, and retain. One of the major barriers for struggling adolescent readers is the self-identity of a struggling learner that comes along with that. One of the ways we can soften this blow is by the semantics that we use. When we are teaching adolescents, we are trying to get them to buy into whatever we're selling. We are trying to get them to take ownership of this information, to pick up whatever we're laying down. And so semantics and how we approach it is very important. I would encourage you to adopt the term linguistics when we're talking about foundational reading skills. Linguistics is the study of language. It's one of the fastest growing majors right now in our country because of AI, and AI is built on language models. So instead of telling students or putting students in a class that's labeled reading lab or remediation, you can say, we are going to start class today with a 5-minute linguistic warm-up. This is good for tier 1 instruction. There's a saying about education with some and all. Some students require this support, but all students will benefit from it. So for example, if we have a diverse classroom filled with non-readers, multi-language learners, and on-level students, we might think there's no reason to break down a word by its syllable or by its phonemes, which means its sounds, because not all of the learners require that. This is one of those things that some students do require. It's also going to benefit your general education students because it's going to strengthen and elevate their understanding of language. Even if you're a fluent reader, you can comprehend well, you might not understand the minutia of sound symbol correspondence. And so that's just going to help you to be an even better reader and writer and a stronger student. So don't discount or diminish the linguistics thinking that your on-level students or upper tiered students wouldn't need this or it would slow them down. It will still benefit their learning. Let's look at the components of linguistics. If we can think about these as the bricks in a wall, by the time students are in secondary, we are really focusing on those top tiers, which is writing and reading comprehension. We can't circumvent these skills. And that very bottom layer is sounds, or in linguistics, we use the term phonemes. Onset and rhyme is really the beginning of a word and the rest of the word. So when we're sounding out, that's how a word blends together. Syllables, and then it moves to words, sentences, fluency, reading comprehension, and writing. And if you speak or practice multiple languages, you probably can relate to the fact that each language has its own distinct sounds, whether it's in dialect or pronunciation. So one of the first keys, even in your native language development, is having your ear tune in to the sounds of your language. There's a linguistic concept called perceptual narrowing. As an infant, your brain has the capacity for all languages. But by the time you are 6 months to 1 year old, your brain starts pruning those sounds that it doesn't need. So if you are an English-speaking household, your ear is going to develop those types of sounds. If you're in a multi-language household, your brain is going to hold the capacity for the sounds that that language contains. You always hear that it's easier to acquire a language when you're young, and that's true. Your brain development has greater capacity for language acquisition than older children or adults do. So what does this have to do with me teaching social studies? If you have students who are still lacking this bottom tiers of sounds, they're still trying to tune in their ear to the sounds of the language. Until they master that skill or become proficient in phonemic awareness, they're not going to get to the level of comprehension and writing. There are exercises and quick activities that you can do in your classroom, regardless of the subject area that you're teaching. You can integrate it into your content so that you're providing additional opportunities for students to practice with this skill. Let's look at phonological awareness. So again, just practicing listening to the sounds in a word. So you may be more familiar with counting syllables in a word. I know growing up, one of the typical ways students were taught was clapping out syllables or stomping out syllables. Elephant. Another way that they can count those syllables is to put their hand under their chin, and each time their mouth opens, you can count a syllable there. Elephant. So you have to over enunciate. Every syllable contains a vowel. On vowel sounds, your mouth opens more. So elephant. 3. So syllable counting is different than phoneme counting, which is what we're getting ready to do. It's the next step of drilling down into a word. These practices are important though, because we typically write what we hear. It's a very common spelling error for children to write the word dragon, J-R-A-G-U-N, dragon, because we write what we hear. So being able to tune our ear into each syllable and then into each sound is a crucial step to writing. Let's practice just a few of these warm-ups. We're going to count the sounds or the phonemes in each word. We're going to start with ice, and we're going to count the sounds in the word. I, s, 2 sounds. Now let's do the word sigh. S, I. 2 sounds. and do it with me. Day, d, a, two sounds. Aid, a, d, two sounds. So you can just see the pattern there of the inverse sounds. Now the word choose, ch, oo, z, three sounds in choose. And then quake, ka, wa, a, four sounds in quake. That QU makes a KW sound. And so just doing that with students helps them practice, and they really struggle at first. You'll see just after a few weeks, even if you just do just these six, and you can switch these words up every day and just do it for a few moments. And that little practice, you'll see them get better and better at this skill. Let's try the next one. So we're moving up into complexity, this left side of the box. We're going to say peas without the say peas without the sound. Ease. Say sheet without the t sound. She. Say stop without the s sound. Top. Say wild without the d sound. While. Okay, so that's called a deletion activities. We're just taking or deleting one of the sounds of the word. The more we manipulate and practice sounds and manipulating words, the stronger our language skills become. Now on the right side of the screen, where these four words are, we're going to do the most complex phonemic awareness activity, where we say the sounds in the word and then we're going to reverse them. So I'll model for us, but please feel free to do it along with me. The word teach has three sounds, t, e, ch. Now we're going to reverse those sounds, ch, e, t, cheat. Next word, cuts, ka, t, s. Backwards, k, stuck. Thigh, I, backwards, I, ice. Pitch, p, I, ch. PCH makes one sound, ch, I, chip, backwards. So see, it's not too difficult, but it's just, but it might just be a new skill, practicing a new skill. Now, if this was something that was difficult for you, or you're not confident to do it with your students because you're like, I don't know if I'm right. The resource that I pulled these activities from that I will include in the reference section of the slide deck is called Speech to Print by Louisa Moats. And she has ready to go activities. So you can just pull one of these and do it as your linguistic warm up for the day. Just take a few moments and do that. And then I'm also going to show you some different ways to integrate it into your content. Now we are ready to move on to the next thread in the strand, and that is decoding. And again, we are still focusing on our non-decoding students. Decoding also encompasses encoding, which is spelling. Let's talk about a few of the factors that make English a difficult language to decode. English is considered an opaque language. Spanish is a transparent language because each letter or vowel has only one sound, a one-to-one sound letter correspondent. English does not. There are 26 letters in the alphabet. Those 26 letters make 44 sounds. There are 75 different ways to spell those sounds, and most of those require multiple letters. We think teaching reading should be easy because we're teaching 26 letters in the alphabet, when actually we should be also teaching the 44 sounds and the 75 spellings. If we did teach those, it wouldn't feel so complex and confusing and surprising. We would actually understand the rules behind it. Let's look at the definitions of decoding and encoding. Decoding is the ability to translate a word from print to speech. This is where we need to understand the code. I mentioned yesterday, our brain is wired for language. It's not wired for reading. You could visit a different country and acquire the language. You can stay in a library all day long. You're not going to pick up how to read. You have to understand that code. So decoding is really, if you think about it, print to sound. And encoding is the inverse. It's sound to print. It's the ability to translate spoken words into print by using that knowledge of sound symbol correspondence or that code. There have been some shifts over the last few decades of how spelling is taught and prioritized in the curriculum. It was common in the last even 10 to 15 years for spelling not to be common or prioritized in the curriculum. And before that, it was highly prioritized. It really went by the wayside with the onset of the Common Core standards or the Indiana academic standards. The thinking was spelling wasn't in the standards, so it must not be important. But there's actually a lot of misunderstanding about academic standards, what they are and how they should be used. Academic standards are the outcome of what students should be able to do. It's not a list of things that should be taught. Spelling is one of the primary foundational skills students need for decoding and writing. And it's been a missing link in our curriculum for several years. With the shift to the science of reading and the requirement of having an approved curriculum, spelling is returning to its rightful place as an important factor in curriculum. However, how spelling is taught can still be a hit or miss. Spelling should not be taught as here's a list of words from the upcoming story. Memorize them. There's no long-term retention with that. We don't see the transfer from students just doing isolated spelling words, transferring that ability into their writing. Where we need to start is our high frequency words. There are 100 words that will make up 50% of the text that students interact with on a daily basis. If we can prioritize those 100 words and make sure students have automaticity, meaning they see it and they immediately know it, that is going to make things so much more efficient for their reading brain. They won't have to hold that information in their brain. It's called offloading that cognitive load. If things are automatic, I can use my brain space for thinking and not for figuring out how to spell a word. I mentioned the way to not teach spelling is by memorizing a random list of words in isolation. Instead, we should teach spelling rules. And I'm pulling these all from a text called Uncovering the Logic of English by Denise Ide. There are 31 spelling rules written in that text. She breaks down 31 spelling rules, explains the rule, and then shows you how to generate a list with students. So I want to show you a few examples of the spelling rules from her text. The first one is the magic E rule, or you may have learned it as the silent E rule. It says the vowel says its name when it's followed by a consonant and an E. And some example words are cape, type, bone, and cute. How we would teach this is we present the rule to students. We show them examples, then we help, depending on their age and ability level, we generate a list that we can do whole group as a class, or they can do it partner work, and then we pool that. And then maybe that spelling rule becomes an anchor chart on the wall for reference later, so that when you come across those words, you can reference back to that rule. This is also a great time to have discussion about exceptions. Adolescents are going to try to prove you wrong. So if you show them a rule, they'll try to think of all the ways and to find all the exceptions to that rule. But that's great. Bring it on. It's great conversation about language. The next rule is no English word ends in the letters I, U, J, or V. And again, they're going to try to find exceptions to those rules. Taxi cab, taxi is short for that. Ski is a Norwegian word and macaroni is an Italian word. So again, we would teach the rule, memorize that, generate a list of words for exceptions. The next rules are soft C and soft G. Soft C says S, like an S sound when it's followed by an E, I, or Y, like in cycle and cereal. Otherwise, it says the hard C sound like cake and Coke and cluck. Soft G has a J sound also when it's followed by an E, I, or Y, like in gem, gem, and giraffe. Otherwise, it makes the hard G or G sound like in game, globe, gear. So we would present one rule at a time, brainstorm and generate a list together. And then as a formative assessment, we present the rule and then ask them to generate examples or even non-examples. The next rule is TI, SI, and CI all make the sh sound, like an action, musician, passion. The next rule is the j sound ending. So we just learned that no English word ends in the letter J, but we have a lot of words that end in the j sound. Well, those are spelled with GE or DGE. If it's followed by a long vowel sound, it'll be spelled GE, like in page. If it's followed by a short vowel sound, it'll be spelled with DGE, like budge or judge. The next Y rule is about the Y ending. When a one-syllable word ends in a single vowel Y, it makes the long I sound, like in fry, cry, and try. And then the last rule I'm going to share with you is the Y beginning sound, which if a Y is at the beginning of the word, it makes the true Y sound, the Y sound. Otherwise, if it's in a different position in the word, it makes a vowel sound. So these are just a few examples of how we can approach teaching spelling. It's not an arbitrary list of memorized words that won't transfer into their writing. Maybe some of these rules were new to you. Again, even for fluent readers that may not need basic spelling instruction, even learning these rules are still going to elevate their academic success. Some students need this, but it will benefit all students. Another way to approach decoding is by teaching the basic syllable types. This helps with our decoding and our pronunciation of words. For example, the R controlled syllable type. If a vowel is followed by an R, it changes the sound of that vowel. In elementary, we teach this as the bossy because the bossy R kind of takes over the sound of that vowel. So normally we would have C-A, cat. We would have C-A-T, cat. But when we add that R, C-A-R, it changes the vowel sound to R, K-R. It's not K-A-R. So you can see that bossy R takes over the pronunciation of the vowel. The consonant LE sound, if you see an LE following a consonant, you'll know that it makes an ul sound, like table, candle. A vowel team is when you have two vowels working together to make one sound. This is part of those 44 sounds that are spelled 75 different ways. So teaching those vowel teams will help students with their pronunciation and spelling. If you remember back to our brick wall of the components of linguistics, the first brick was sounds, the second brick was onset and rhyme. And why this is important is because this is how we decode or blend words together. Onset is the beginning sound, or what comes before the vowel. The rhyme, the vowel, and everything after it. First, let's identify the onset. So the letter or sound that comes before the vowel. In the word egg, there is no letter that comes before the sound. So there's no onset in egg. There's just a rhyme. Egg is the rhyme. For the word net, in would be the onset. Et would be the rhyme. So if a student's approaching this word to decode it, that's how they would sound it or blend it out. And as a teacher, that's how we would instruct them. For ship, SH is a vowel digraph, two words that make one sound. So sh is the onset, it is the rhyme. So when we're blending and decoding this word, we would teach students to say sh, it in order to put it together. And, and, spent, sp, ent, ice, just a rhyme, ice. Stop would be st, op, and clock, cl. Again, this will only pertain to a small population of students within your classroom. But if a student raises their hand and asks a question of how do I pronounce this word, this is how you can instruct them. You look at that first part of the word, everything that comes from the vowel, and you break it up that way and model that for them. So moving on, we're still looking at the decoding strands, and we're still working with our students who are non-decoders. struggling at the word level. But one of the things that we do consistently as secondary teachers is teach vocabulary, regardless of what content we're teaching, whether it's ELA and poetry terminology, scientific terminology, geography terms, whatever the content may be. There's a huge list of vocabulary that is required to learn in each subject. So I want to practice with you a few ways where you can teach vocabulary and support your non-decoding students. One of the best ways to do this is through teaching prefixes and suffixes and root words. Ideally, you select the 100 most commonly used affixes, and schools that use a district-wide initiative. So maybe they have these 30 that they're teaching in sixth grade, these 30 that they're teaching in seventh grade, and these 30 that they're teaching in eighth grade. And that list continues to grow. So they roll over their list from year to year. When they leave eighth grade, they'll have 90 affixes memorized. That's going to unlock a huge amount of words for them to understand. So when you're teaching this, you can teach the meaning, but you can also teach how to say each of those word parts. Another activity you can do is called a word matrix. So you provide one root word within options for the prefixes and the suffixes, and students work to create their own words and then break down what the new word they made means. Again, they're putting together the vocabulary and the meaning of each morpheme or each word part, but they're also decoding those and practicing how to blend them together. Unteachable. This is an activity that is especially great for science, who utilizes a lot of Latin words. It's called morpheme mapping, and you break each word part up into its morpheme or its unit of meaning. For example, the word projective, the prefix is pro, which means for or forward. Ject means to throw, and IVE means the ability to. So I can provide each word part and ask students to provide the meaning if they're working on that, or I can provide the meaning as well. So we map the word backwards. So after we have all of that filled out, then we say projective, the ability to throw forward. And that provides the meaning for us. So then the students would write the meaning in the bottom row. Here's another example of the word eruption. We break that up into our morphemes. Erupt, ION. E means out or away. Rupt means to burst. And ION is action of. So we map it backwards, the act of bursting out. And then the students would write that meaning or the definition. If we're using a prefix, that means not. We start with the prefix first. So we say, if the word is incredible, not able to believe. If this is how we're teaching our explicit vocabulary, we can easily integrate a few additional steps to support those non-decoding students. We start with the word erosion. Then we're going to syllabicate the word erosion. This is going to help your students who are non-decoders or your English language learners. Think about tuning their ears into each sound. As a native English speaker, but I also speak Spanish or try to. I can read Spanish pretty fluently, but when I listen to someone speak, it's very difficult if they're native and they speak quickly. If they slow down and syllabicate the words, it's much easier for me to hear each part of that word and then translate it. So syllabicating a word is a quick 5-second step that you can add to your vocabulary instruction that will benefit the students who need it. The next addition you can make is the phoneme counting. Identify the sounds or phonemes in the word, which is also going to help with their spelling. If you think back to the brain, the image of the MRI brain that I showed you in session 1, where we had the red blob that was really struggling and recognizing the images, and then the blue brain that had all those multiple points. Learning a word is like making a spider web. The more connection points you have, the better that student will understand and retain that word. So think of erosion as the main part, and we are trying to make this word as sticky as possible for retention. So if I syllabicate it, that's one stick. If I say its phonemes, E, O, J, N. 6 sounds and I'm pulling those out. That's also benefiting my spelling brain. So the phonemes is an additional web or link. And then we do our phoneme mapping. E means out or away. Row comes from rod, which means to gnaw. SION is the act of. So it's the act of gnawing away. And then I'm going to verify that definition with the book definition, the process of wearing away or removing material. And then I added like gnawing away over time. So that one word with multiple sticking points, then I'll even remember it better if you can show me a picture or create an image. I wanted to share one of my favorite quotes about vocabulary. It really articulates the importance of vocabulary and thinking. A person who knows more about words can speak and even think more precisely about the world. A person who knows the terms scarlet, crimson, azure, and indigo can think about colors in a different way than a person who is limited to red and blue. Words divide the world. The more words we have, the more complex ways we can think about the world. It reminds me of the toddler who doesn't have the words to say, "Give me my toy," so he bites another child. A limited vocabulary literally limits our decision-making ability and the effectiveness of our communication. And unfortunately, so many of our students have a limited vocabulary. Children in households where the family is receiving government assistance typically have fewer words spoken to them, and they're spoken in short, imperative, declarative sentences, which use little to no description. As I mentioned before, as a child, our brain has this capacity for language and words and developing a vocabulary. If they're only being spoken to in very few words and short sentences, when they get to school and they start reading complex sentence structure or hearing text with a lot of descriptions or analogies or figurative language, comprehension will absolutely be a barrier. So expressive and receptive vocabulary, to define those, receptives are the words that I hear and understand. Expressive vocabulary, the words that I use and communicate. So input versus output. Expressive vocabulary references output. So those children have an expressive vocabulary that's 2 times higher than their working class peers, and their receptive vocabulary is 5 times higher than those low-income families. So when we talk about the knowledge gap or the achievement gap between the haves and the have-nots, one of those ways that they are at a disadvantage is based on their vocabulary. There's this idea called the Matthew effect, where the rich get richer. And that's true with vocabulary. When a student reads a text, they have to be able to understand at least 90% of the words in that text. Their brain can fill in the gaps for that 10% that they're missing. Whereas if a student only knows 70% of the words in the text, those gaps are too great for them to fill in the blanks, and they are not going to understand the text that they just read. So what happens is those students that can read on grade level will continue to acquire more vocabulary, and their vocabulary grows and grows. What we do a lot with our special education students or multilingual learners, we will water down the text so that they can access it. So if they're in 7th grade, we'll give them a 3rd grade text if that's where they're reading. Unfortunately, they're not being exposed to any rich vocabulary that's going to increase their understanding and comprehension. So it really plateaus them. Meanwhile, the students that read the text learn more words and can read greater text and learn more words and then can read greater text. Thereby, the rich get richer. One workaround with this is by using audio text. This is a question that teachers wonder about frequently. Is it okay if they listen to audiobooks? The answer is it depends on the goal. If the goal is decoding and fluency, they absolutely have to read, where they are practicing reading independent so that they can develop that fluency. However, if the goal is for the student to get this content, then absolutely, by all means, an audio version is appropriate. And for many of you, that's where your focus is. You need students to understand the content. So utilize your AI resources and your translation or read aloud features. Allow students to grasp that content. The receptive understanding is higher. They have to be exposed to that grade level content. Expose them to that rich vocabulary so that they can continue to grow. So there are three main obstacles when it comes to teaching vocabulary. Number one is the sheer volume of words students need to learn. Every year, students need to learn between 2,000 and 3,000 vocabulary words. First of all, English has one of the largest vocabularies of over 2 million words. We are a melting pot of languages, and we have consumed and absorbed words and terminology from all other languages. And with every new field or invention, vocabulary continues to grow. So the sheer quantity of vocabulary is a challenge. That's our first problem. Number two is the decontextualization. Academic language is so different from our casual speech. Even as a native English speaker, the terms we use and the sentence structure we use in just our dialogue is different from how we read things. We will write things in a way that is complex, or the sentence is organized differently, and we would never speak that way. So even for a native speaker, it can be tricky. Learning how to speak and write at school is almost like learning a second language. You have to develop a new vocabulary. And then the third obstacle is the retention and usage of that word. It's one thing to come across a word and understand it in context or study for it and get it right on a quiz. It's a completely different thing to absorb and internalize this word and for that word to become part of your personal lexicon or vocabulary. That's a completely different level of vocabulary learning. When it comes to vocabulary instruction, we really have to ask ourselves the question, how will our students need to use this word? So if the student just needs to be able to be aware of the word or understand it in context, then they can just learn it to the receptive level. That means as we're reading a text, we can stop, talk about the word, discuss it, and keep going. Versus if a student needs to know the word in depth, be able to write about it, discuss it, explain it, they're going to use it next year, they're going to use it their entire life, then that's at a different level. So that requires explicit instruction. And like I mentioned, that spider web, making all of those points. So first step in vocabulary instruction is really asking yourself, how will my students need to use this word? That will determine what kind of instruction you give them on the term. Implicit instruction is the long-term vocabulary building. Students will implicitly gain a large vocabulary by intense exposure to rich language, interspersed with brief discussions of meanings. Furthermore, they believe that it's more efficient to spend time listening and reading interesting materials. So just by speaking, hearing good speaking models, listening to and reading text or works with a rich vocabulary, being exposed to a classroom environment of rich language. This is an implicit approach to vocabulary. You'll hear the term a knowledge building curriculum. And this is one of the things that legislation is calling for with the science of reading. They're requiring states to have approved curriculum. And part of the criteria for that approved curriculum is that it is background knowledge building. We're taking concepts and we're building them in depth and in breadth. So instead of talking about one topic for a week, maybe we're doing a unit on friends or friendship or community. Instead, we're doing an entire semester on Greek mythology. And so we're diving in much more deeply into the texts and into the vocabulary around that topic. This is what they mean by a knowledge building curriculum. The other approach is known as explicit instruction. So this means detailed, descriptive, very specific instruction on a specific word. I used the example of erosion and erupt, and we did the morpheme mapping. This would be an example of explicit instruction. Words that are specifically and directly taught. Now, if the goal is to teach 2,000 to 3,000 words a year, there is not enough time in the day to give explicit instruction for all of those vocabulary words, nor would students have the mental capacity to learn and retain all of those words. Our adolescent students can learn up to about 15 words a day. So we have to be very specific and intentional about the words that we choose that we're going to give explicit instruction. If the question is which is better, students need both. Research shows us what is critical when it comes to vocabulary instruction. There are things that we must do. Number one with that list is intentional selection of words. Asking yourself the question, how do my students need to know and be able to use this word? That will dictate how I teach. Number two, the language immersion, making sure we're providing grade level text, podcasts, videos, they're exposed and hearing the academic language of your domain or discipline, and that you yourself are modeling the appropriate professional or academic language. And we have to emphasize knowing word parts and how important that is to unlocking other words. An activity like the morpheme mapping is so beneficial for students, one, because they're going to understand those meanings and it helps them break down the word, but two, sometimes it's mind-blowing for students. They never knew a word part had its own meaning. Many students, just from lack of instruction or exposure to language, they don't understand. They see one vocabulary word as an entire meaning. So when they see a word like in the morpheme mapping structure, when it's broken out like that and each part of the word has its own separate meaning, there's a real light bulb moment and connection that happens in students' brains. So that is a fabulous activity to use for students when you model and teach explicitly. We're going to look at some different vocabulary routines, but in all of those, you'll find multiple sticking points. So that's spider web, where we're teaching that word and we're going to teach the synonyms that go along with that, possibly the antonyms. We're going to have pictures or images, and then how to use that word in a meaningful way, context of how that word is used. And that helps the student file it away in their schema, which is like their mental filing cabinet. And they've got to have background knowledge in order to file that word away. There are 3 tiers of vocabulary. Tier 1 refers to words that are commonly known. These are a lot of your nouns and objects or basic verbs. Tier 2 words are words that can be considered high utility words. So these get more descriptive, maybe fall into the more professional category. But a key factor about these words is that you can use them across disciplines. So you're not just going to use them in one place, you'll use them in multiple subjects and in real life. Tier 3 words are domain-specific, content-specific academic words. They're important to know in that context, but they most likely will not arise during a normal, typical conversation, whether that's a casual conversation or professional conversation. They're going to be very domain-specific. Every text contains all of these words. When it comes to selecting vocabulary to teach explicitly, research shows us to prioritize those tier 2 words. When we have a unit of study and we're wondering which words we should teach explicitly, we're going to pull out our list of vocabulary words for the year and we'll prioritize any tier 2 words. As a teacher, you'll get your greatest return on your investment if you prioritize teaching tier 2 words, because students will need these in life and they can use them in any subject area. This is a 7th grade social studies text. So I'm going to use this as an example. And then later in this session, you'll practice identifying the tier 2 words, but I'll highlight the words here. And these, of course, can be based on their geography and their exposure. For example, the word livestock might need to be taught or mentioned depending on where your students are from. Here in Western Indiana, you most likely will not have to teach the term livestock to a 7th grader. So geography and experience play a role in what vocabulary will need to be taught. It's also critical to develop a vocabulary routine that you're comfortable with and then stick to it. Many teachers will try different things every time, thinking that maybe students might like this way better than another way. I understand the rationale behind that, but actually the research shows us that students do much better with consistent routines. They're able to develop those habits And then instead of focusing on what is this template like, my learning now goes to trying to figure out what this template is. Once I'm practiced with it and used to it, then my brain, my cognitive load and energy can go into the content. And that's where we want it to go. So find a vocabulary routine that you like and stick with it. It's even better if you can get your school on board or your grade level team or your department, wherever kids can have that kind of consistency across their classrooms. It's going to help them. I wanted to share a few of the common routines with you. The first one is called The 7 Steps to Vocabulary, and it's by Margarita Calderon. So this example breaks down 7 different ways or things that you do with the word that you're introducing. For example, it scripts for the teacher the phases to take this word through during the instruction. So say manage 3 times. This would be a perfect time to break down those syllabications. Manage. Phonemic awareness, or break down the phonemes and count the phonemes and the sounds. Step 2, teacher reads and shows the word in a sentence or a context. That's your second sticking point. Number 3, the teacher gives the dictionary definition. So this provides the exposure to the formal word and what that might be like. And then step 4 is they take their definition of manage that they learn and understand, and the teacher can put it in student-friendly definition, and then the student needs to write it in their own words. Step 5 is the teacher highlights the aspects of the word that might create difficulty. So whether it is a multisyllabic word, or it has a unique root word, or it's a polysemous word, which means like the word stand, it can have multiple meanings. Step 6 is the student uses the word orally. They're going to think, pair, share, what have you managed well? And then step 7 is they use the word in writing. The second protocol is from explicit instruction, and this is Anita Archer's method. And there will also be a video in this session of her modeling this technique. But you display the word and you say it 3 times. Again, we're working on pronunciation, making that word a little bit more automatic. A word becomes automatic because of our repeated exposure to it in text. So repeating that word, again, you can syllabicate and pull out the phonemes of that word, and then give the student-friendly definition. Again, this is crucial. So many times as we're teaching vocabulary, students will just copy a definition out of a text or from its original source without any understanding of what that means. So step 1 in learning vocabulary is it has to be meaningful or understandable. If I'm copying down the definition of photosynthesis and I don't know what any of the words in the definition mean, it is not going to make sense to me. So it has to be explained in a way where I can understand it. And then I have to be able to communicate that. That's my way of communicating that back, making sure that that's accurate. That's what I will remember. That's what I need to capture in writing. That's what I need to say to explain it. That way I'm having ownership of it and I'm one step closer to absorbing that into my personal lexicon. And then step 3, providing visual examples. So images, pictures, graphics, icons, anything that will make a picture. That's that other dot within our brain, connecting that to a picture. And then step 4 in this process is the usage. So I'm using the word in conversation or in writing. The third routine here is an oldie and a goodie. It's been around forever. It's the classic Frere model. So you have the word in the beginning, the word in the middle of the graphic organizer. Then you have in the left top hand corner the definition. Again, that definition has to be in the student's word. It has to be meaningful and understood by the student, or the rest of the process is negated. None of it will work if they don't have it in their own terms, in their own understandable language. Then we list, even if it's just bullets or a quick write, characteristics of it or facts about it. There's a space for a picture or an image. In that bottom right-hand corner, you can do synonyms and antonyms or put it in sentences, how I will use this word. And then beyond this, I would still have students talk about it, write about it within their classwork. Another way to present vocabulary is to provide the word in its word family. So if my vocabulary word that I'm introducing is erode, I'm going to show all the different ways that the student might interact with the word erode. They might come across erodes, eroded, eroding, erosion, erosive, erodibility. So any other way that they might connect with that word. Adolescents, because of their brain development, they're very literal. So they may see the word erodes and erosive and think those are completely different words or terms and have completely separate meanings. So presenting it in a word family helps students to make those connections. Again, that spider web with another sticking point, the word family. Same thing with the example project. All the different ways the student might encounter this word. If you know the meaning of the one word, then you can use your inferencing on the other words in the word family. Here is another way that a word family might look. So maybe you present it as a root word. So the word sign as a root can be found in all of these other terms. Also, there's a great spelling discussion in here too. So if we take the word signature pronunciation, well, sign comes from the word signature. You have students wondering, why is there a G in the word sign? It's because it comes from the word signature. Providing the word within a context of its word family helps their brain make more connections. So you could even use this as word walls or anchor charts to create these together in class and then hang them up and reference them later. And just another way to build their vocabulary. Another strategy is called the best guess definition. And it's taking a word again and manipulating it 5 times so that you can see in everything that we've done, the 7 steps, the Frere model, the 4-step model. We're taking a word and we're manipulating it and using it in as many different ways as we can. That will ensure the student's retention of the word. So in the best guess definition strategy, students may come across a word they don't know. So they list the word if they know the part of speech right off, or maybe they come back to that and add that part in later. They're going to write the context of when and how they encountered the word. And it really takes students through different ways to look at breaking down the word. Does it have prefixes? Does it have roots? Do I know any other of the words, any of the other words in its word family? Are there context clues that help me? And then what's my best guess definition? The last final step then is validating that against a book definition or its original source definition. One strategy that is great, I think, especially for fiction texts, is the bookmark reading strategy. So as students are reading and they come across a word they don't know, they jot it down along with the reference of where they found it, the page number of the book, and then they come back to this. And they can utilize this in their own journal or vocabulary notebooks. Vocabulary notebooks are highly effective. Research has found in any subject area, a vocabulary notebook, they're customized to the student's individual vocabulary and what they need and the words they're learning. So there might be an academic list or a list of unit words that you're teaching, but it might also contain other words that they come across that they don't know. So the term is lexicographers. So they create their own journal of words. They can take their bookmark and then transfer it to their journal and really dive into what that word is. They could use the best guess strategy or any of the other routines that we've used. They're using that word in multiple ways, and then they review that consistently. So maybe a few minutes every day in class, they're taking out their notebook, whether it's digital or physical notebook, and they're going through and reviewing those. You can also organize your vocabulary notebooks using 6 columns. So whether it's a graphic organizer or you just set up a notebook template this way, you have the vocabulary listed in the left column, definition, the part of speech, a synonym, an antonym, and then a picture image icon or icon. Word walls are typically used in every elementary curriculum, and they're rarely used at the secondary level, but they're very effective, and we can make them developmentally appropriate and age respectful. And students will come to rely on these if they know they're there, and they can reference that point during their writing. This acts as a scaffold until they internalize that word. If just being able to look up on the wall and reference it kind of alleviates, again, that cognitive load. We want their energy going into writing. So if they can pull it off of there before it's automatic, that will help them. Our last topic of discussion for session 2 is about motivation and engagement, which can be very difficult to motivate and engage struggling adolescent learners. But the simplest way to increase comprehension is to increase engagement. And to increase engagement, We need to increase thinking. Well, what do I mean by that? Here's a fascinating text by Warren Berger that's called The Beautiful Question. And he's done a lot of research on children questioning, thinking, and learning, and how they are all tied together. And questioning is the most natural way to engage and activate thinking. And if you look at this graph here, we can see that as a child begins to develop speech, they begin to ask a lot of questions. The average 4-year-old girl asks around 390 questions a day. And boys aren't far behind that statistic. Linguistically, girls tend to develop linguistically a little quicker than boys. But if we look at the graph, you can see a spike in their development and age. And then when they reach school age, you can see the significant continual decline. So the focus goes on reading and writing. Then there's the staunch contrast of when the questions begin to decline or decrease and reading and writing increases. So one of the ways we integrate this into our reading instruction is to provide essential questions or an overarching question for our unit of study. This is actually tied to reading comprehension. If there aren't any overarching questions, then we set up learning to be this boring and passive activity. Students begin to learn that their job is just to listen and that teaching is an input that they're receiving. There's not any critical thinking on their part during a lecture. They see learning as just a mere list of facts. And if we state the fact and we're not asking a question, this bypasses the inquiry and any deep understanding. So suppose, as an example, you're a science teacher and you're teaching a unit on summer. You could start with a question like, why is it warmer in summer and colder in winter? Because what happens is this conversation and other questions naturally arise. So you can have someone say, wait, it's colder in winter because of the sun's angle, but how does that account for cold days in the summer? Or why aren't the coldest days in December? This allows space for students to continue to question, which means they're thinking versus sitting passively receiving information. So let's talk about essential questions, because essential questions should frame your units of study regardless of what content area you're in. And this will help build reading comprehension, and you're setting a premise for reading. True essential questions follow these components. They are open-ended. There is not one single answer or one final correct answer. They should spark conversation and be debatable. You can't answer the question by just recall alone. You'll have to infer, to analyze, to evaluate, to use those higher thinking skills. Essential questions should be across content areas. So it's not just going to be held captive to the unit of your study. It's going to be a larger question that can apply to life or to science in general. Essential questions require justification. You can't just answer and move on. You have to provide your justification and your rationale as to why you believe that or think that. And the great thing about a good essential question is after you read and learn more, you may change your answer. And so these can be revisited again and again. So tell me if this is an essential question or not. In what year was the Battle of Hastings fought? Well, that has a simple recall, right or wrong answer. So this is not an essential question. Is biology destiny? Now, this would create some great debate and interest and requires a lot of thinking, evaluating, and must have a justification or rationale. So yes, this would be an essential question. The third one, onomatopoeia. What's up with that? Well, it might be a little bit of a catchy title, but it's still just asking for the definition of what an onomatopoeia is. So not an essential question. What are examples of animals adapting to their environment? This one can toe the line based on intent. So if my intent for students is to give me specific examples of the animals that we've been learning in class, there is a right answer that we've studied and that I'm looking for, then that would be a content question. If I'm providing more of an open space for dialogue and thought and to bring in different factors from different texts of literature that we've read, then this could be considered a more open-ended question. So it could fall into the essential category. And then the final question, was Jefferson a hypocrite? Did he really think Did he really think of a slave as a subhuman while writing the Declaration of Independence? So this could spark some great debate, a lot of interest and engagement. So premising any reading or new area of content study with an overarching essential question is key. And a lot of times curriculum will provide these, and they may not be a true essential question, or it might not be very engaging for students. So you might want to put your own spin on it, because having that overarching question prior to beginning your new unit of study or your reading will tie everything else you do together and increase reading comprehension. So as we wrap up session 2, let's think about what maybe was the most important information for you this session. What's new information that you want to make sure you remember and take away? And what is one action item you have? Maybe you want to check out Uncovering the Logic of English and by Denise Hyde's book and look deeper into spelling rules. This session was on our non-decoders. And so next session, session 3, we're going to look at our disfluent students and how we can support them in our content areas. Until next time.